the most significant challenges we're facing, which has been well reported, is staffing shortages due to the number of individuals that are out in quarantine. So as we've evaluated our options, we've worked really hard over the last several weeks to mitigate those shortages to the greatest extent possible by having staff members that are not assigned to classrooms fill in, as well as central office staff and administrators. And we've reached a threshold of shortage that is requiring us to implement additional strategies. What we're going to be sharing with families is that we're going to be utilizing several days in our school calendar, and we're going to be making an adjustment to have additional non-student days in January, and then moving those days into March.
So to be clear, it's not canceling classes, but you're shifting days of in-person learning.
Correct. Yeah, canceling means you're not going to ever do it. This is adjusting the school calendar, postponing those student days to March that were previously planned as non-student days, which will enable us to have some additional time to bring staff back from quarantining, as well as catch up with contact tracing. With the adjusting the guidelines to have 5-day quarantine periods, any additional day that we're able to utilize puts us in a position to bring back those individual staff members and mitigate the strain further. One of the things that's important to note is we recognize the challenge for our students when they're disconnected from school. And we were looking for an approach that enabled us to not only address the staffing constraints, but do it in a way to try to minimize the impact of students and families to the greatest extent possible. That's the purpose for the advance notice. We know that there's never enough advance notice, but what we want to try to avoid is abrupt cancellations to schools. What we're telling families either the night before or the morning of that school's not going to happen that day. We know when that's the case that we have students that oftentimes aren't able to access a meal. Our schools are a warm place. There's childcare ramifications. We know that for many of our families with short notice, if they have to make work, that means missing a day's pay. So understanding that this is a staffing constraint that has to be mitigated in some way, shape, or form, we're trying to have as thoughtful approach possible. That's why we're doing the advance notice. That's why we're strategically connecting these days to weekends, again, to provide those spaces of time to allow the quarantining return to catch up, and also maintaining continuity of service to kids as compared to taking a full week off. We're trying to recognize the various needs and the strains on our school district.
How many staff members do you guys have, and how many are out, maybe either today or from yesterday?
Well, there's a significant number out. We have approximately 5,000 staff members. For example, today we have over 400 certificated staff members that are out on absence. Many of those positions are being filled by substitutes, central office staff, and administrators, but we do have a vast number of unfilled classroom positions that a substitute was not able to be positioned to. When that happens, our schools have to work really creatively, and staff have to then step in on their prep period or their breaks to cover those classes, maintain supervision, and maintain educational services to students, which accentuates not only the challenge of the strain of having a limited number of staff to work with, but it also creates a lot of pressure on the staff that do come to work, because then they're missing their planning time and their prep.
I have a question. So you said catch up on contact tracing. Is the level of spread you're seeing, with both students and staff members, is it past a point where you can really contact trace, or is it just sort of everywhere and it's hard to follow with how many cases there are?
Yeah, well, certainly the spike in cases has created additional pressure on our contact tracers, and they've done an absolutely incredible job. They work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to manage the number of cases that are coming in. With the surge, every minute counts, every day counts for us to do that well and thoughtfully, and these additional adjustments to our calendar is going to offer some of that reprieve. We're also implementing an online interactive tool to help aid in the contact tracing process for staff, and we anticipate launching a similar online interactive tool for students in the coming days.
And then with the no student days, so just to clarify from my understanding, will that still mean some online schoolwork will be available, or will that be totally no school days?
So in our school calendar, we have a variety of days throughout the school year that are non-student days. Some of those are designated as snow makeup days, that if we have a major snow event that causes us to close school, then we end up having school on that day so we can make our 180-day requirement. We also have professional development days for staff, where the staff are coming to work and training, and then kids are at home. We have 2 of those days that were scheduled for March. And so what this strategy is taking those 2 planned non-student days in March and moving them into January. So students will go to school on those March days, and now days that they would have gone to school in January, they will not, to create those additional spaces of time to help us catch up on contact tracing, as well as bring additional staff back from quarantining.
And then if we do see, additional surge significantly beyond that 400 staff level absence, is there potential for a lot more cancellations or maybe moving more online in that event?
Well, the guidance from public health officials has been to maintain in-person learning, and so that is currently our #1 focus, and to make these adjustments to maintain that continuity for students. We do get questions about the possibility of returning to remote learning. We're very cognizant that remote learning was very challenging for many of our students from a mental health standpoint, from the standpoint of basic needs. We have many students with receiving special education services where distance learning creates significant barriers and makes access to learning very unequitable. So we're very mindful of that, and it aligns with the guidance we're hearing from public health officials to focus on in-person learning, but also recognizing that these staffing shortages are requiring some additional mitigation strategies to manage.
So really it's a proactive approach to what we're seeing with the spike in cases after winter break and with Omicron here, to avoid a scenario where we might have to go online or have kids miss a day that wasn't already planned, right?
Yeah, this is a strategy to examine what we're hearing from public health officials regarding the epidemiological trajectory of this surge, and recognize that school districts across our state and country are taking a variety of different approaches. One of the things that we believe in Spokane Public Schools is that abrupt cancellation to school days is very detrimental to students and families, and is also difficult for staff. We're looking to avoid that with the greatest extent possible. So rather than taking it day by day, knowing that we are hitting that threshold of making it almost insurmountable, where we would have to make a cancellation and then telling families either the night before or the day of, we are trying to examine that science, listen to our public health officials around what direction they think we're headed and where the case counts are likely headed, look at our current quarantine numbers and say, is there a way that we can make some adjustments to the school calendar to build in an opportunity for us to maintain services to kids? And that's what this approach is about.
So is there a forecast as far as what we're seeing in cases in schools with staff members that you guys have been presented or been looking at? Because we're hearing from public health officials, hey, based on what they saw in South Africa with this Omicron variant, it's likely that we're going to see a steep decrease in cases in X amount of weeks. Is it too early to tell what the forecast looks like in schools right now, or is that something that's being discussed?
Well, I think one of the things that the pandemic has taught us is that it's highly unpredictable, and we need to make the best decisions we can with the information we have available to us. We're hearing some of those same things that's being shared across multiple sectors, is that this curve is likely going to come very fast and also dissipate quickly. And so we are hearing from our public health officials that the peak of the surge is likely somewhere in the next 6 to 10 day window, and that we can probably anticipate a drop in cases. We're planning for a variety of different contingencies. That's why no option is off the table, but it's why we're trying to look at the information that's available and make a proactive decision to maintain services to our kids and support our staff.
And the last question I have for you is how's your nurse, not just as an entire staff, obviously this is important, but how are your nurses holding up in schools? This has got to be just a really crazy time for them.
Well, any educator that works in a school right now, whether it's a secretary or a nurse or a classroom teacher or a custodian, everybody is working at max capacity right now, not only because of the pandemic and the extra safety protocols that are in place, but having a significant staffing shortage. When staff are out, school still happens and everybody needs to pick up a little bit more work. And that is definitely having a cumulative effect on our staff and their mental health, as well as their energy and ability to be the best version of themselves. So we're very cognizant of that. Right now, this strategy is very focused on the fact that there's a significant shortage, and we need to look at strategies to try to provide some space and time where we can bring people back from quarantine, have as few as number of staff members out as possible so we can serve kids and also not create that additional burden on the staff members that are at school that day. one of the things that we recognize is there's an exponential impact when staff are having to take on all that extra work and they're not getting their planned breaks. And what we don't want to do is put ourselves in a position where staff are getting sick, maybe not with COVID, but just general fatigue, and then they're taking a sick day. So we've got a group of staff that are out for quarantine, and now we've got another group that are out just because of the general fatigue of not having any breaks. So we're being very mindful of all those factors. Right now the focus is strategies that are going to allow us to bring more people back from quarantine and shift those school days to March.
Are we seeing any at this time that are not necessarily sick with COVID, but are having to take time off for fatigue?
We are absolutely hearing from staff that they're experiencing some significant fatigue. At this point, we don't necessarily think that is pervasive, but it's something we want to be very mindful of. The vast majority of our staff absences are related to quarantining at this time.
I mean, you have said that this is a more proactive strategy right now. Should things continue and we do have to get to the point where we go back to remote learning, how difficult would that be for Spokane Public Schools?
Well, our staff did an incredible job when we were in remote learning, providing services to kids. Obviously, we know there was a significant impact to many of our students, and that the best place for our kids is to provide in-person learning. That's where our focus is right now. That's what our public health officials are telling us based on the trajectory of this variant and what they believe is the best recommendations they can provide at this time.
In the email to families, you mentioned that 50 staff members from the central office or other staff members are filling in. Can you give us an example of what positions they're filling and what concerns you can, I guess, address for parents who feel like their students may not be getting the learning that they should because of all of this?
Well, there's no question that their classroom teacher that they have on a day-in and day-out basis is the individual that's going to be able to provide them the best experience. That's who they have relationships with. That's who's connected to where they are in the scope and sequence of the curriculum. But we have a number of staff members that have vast expertise in education and serving students that are in non-classroom roles, and those are the people that we're reassigning into those positions, whether it is a director of special education services. That individual will be out in a classroom serving as a substitute teacher. Obviously, she has a vast skill set in providing instructions to kids. Is it the teacher that they're used to? No. But is it someone that loves kids and understands education? Absolutely.
Do you have any student absentee rate numbers?
Yes, it's ranged over the last couple weeks anywhere from 10 to 20%. And it really varies significantly across schools. Yesterday, district-wide, we were at approximately 20% absent rate.
Last thing I had a question about was Monday, January 30th, no school semester break day. That was a planned day already in the schedule?
Correct. That was a pre-planned day. So what we've taken is the next 3 weekends, and we've looked at those next 3 weekends and said, how can we provide a little bit extra time for contact tracing and return to quarantines? So we've made this previously planned 3-day weekend a 4-day weekend. We are highly anticipating utilizing the 24th for another 3-day weekend, and then we had a pre-planned 3-day weekend that last the 31st.
And parents will know about the 24th by the 20th?
By Thursday, by next Thursday, correct. Yep. And we're going to watch conditions really closely and watch staffing levels, but we do highly anticipate, based on the epidemiological trajectory we're hearing from public health officials, we're highly anticipating that strategy will be needed, but we want to be mindful that things change quickly, and we need to be doing the best we can to monitor the current conditions and make adjustments.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Oh, no.
Oh, you're not the fancy one?
No, I'm
Thank
not the fancy one.
Okay. All right.
I'll take them both. Okay.